At the US-Canada border, people used to joke, "You don't need a passport, just bring a smile and some cash." But by 2025, the smile seems to still be there. It's just that the Canadian wallet stayed home. No protests, no angry slogans, just Canadians quietly passing on America. They're no longer flying down to Florida to escape the cold, no longer driving their RVs to Arizona, no longer stopping by Minnesota ports to buy corn or auto parts. And that's sending several U.S. states, from Michigan to Illinois, into a quiet panic. This isn't a recession. It's an economic boycott with a name: Canada's Silent Turnaway. And the consequence? A domino effect toppling everything from golf courses to assembly lines. The question is, can 6 U.S. states really fall into crisis just because Canadians stop spending? The bad news is, it's already starting to happen. When Florida loses Canadian snow. In Florida, there used to be 3 things considered permanent: sunshine, the beach, and Canadians. The northern snowbirds, mostly retirees from Ontario, Quebec, and Alberta, once flocked to the Sunshine State like clockwork, arriving in November, heading back in April, bringing with them smiles, money, and an unlimited appetite for waffles, coconut ice cream, and real estate. But in 2025, something strange is happening. The beaches are still blue. The palm trees still sway in the Atlantic breeze. But the beachfront villas, once booked 6 months in advance, now sit in the dark. The neighborhoods that used to buzz with that distinctive Canadian accent are now eerily quiet. And when a hotel clerk in Naples asks, "Do you have a reservation?" the only reply is the faint hum of the ceiling fan spinning in the lobby. Florida hasn't just lost tourists. Florida is losing blood. The kind of economic lifeblood printed in bluish tones with Queen Elizabeth's face on it. In a state where tourism accounts for nearly 15% of the GDP, Canadians aren't guests. They are the bloodstream. And as that bloodstream slows to a trickle, economic anemia is beginning to spread, from the beach side to the city council chambers. The scary part isn't the number of flights canceled, which has dropped by more than 70% from cities like Toronto and Montreal. The scary part is, no one announced it. No ban, no diplomatic meeting. Canadians simply stopped coming, as if they all simultaneously and politely unfollowed Florida. An organized absence, no press conference required. Why? Part of it is due to U.S. immigration policies in 2025 becoming stricter and more inconsistent, delayed visas, longer border checks, and an unwelcoming tone that led many Canadians, though fond of the sunshine, to stay home or opt for Mexico, Portugal, or even Cuba. Add to that the rising movement of buying local within Canada. And Florida has become a living example of a modern economic lesson. You can't build a business purely on old goodwill. In Fort Lauderdale, a restaurant owner reported March revenue down 38% compared to the same period last year. In Sarasota, a winter lodging complex that used to be fully booked is now only at 50% capacity. Even Disney World, America's tourism monument, has recorded a sharp drop in Canadian visitors. And this isn't just about tourism, it's the whole value chain, from travel health insurance, car rentals, entertainment services, to those margaritas in beachside bars. All are feeling the drag. But Floridians and Americans still hold on to optimism, in a very American way. They put up signs in French to attract Quebec visitors. They launched Buy One Get One for Canadians Only vouchers as a polite plea. They even renamed a tour in the Everglades north of North Welcome Trail, as if to say, "We miss you." Truly. However, humor can't replace policy. And without strategic changes at the federal level regarding visas, diplomacy, and a warmer welcome, Even signs that say, "We love Canadians," will lose their meaning. Florida is at a crossroads. One path waits for the return of its northern friends, hoping this is just a missed winter. The other path learns to adapt, opening up to new markets, restructuring tourism, and investing in more sustainable models. But one thing is certain: if you see a Canadian in a Uniqlo windbreaker on Miami Beach, greet them like long-lost family. They don't just bring smiles, they bring revenue, hope, and a part of Florida's economic soul. And if not careful, Florida might not just lose one snowbird season, but an entire era of prosperity tied to two simple words: Canada-friendly. Arizona. Without the maple leaf. If Florida lost its snow, then Arizona lost the entire caravan from Alberta. For Americans, winter is a time for skiing, but for Canadians, winter is a time to escape snow. And Arizona, with its golden sun, rosy deserts, and rental prices cheaper than California, used to be the perfect stopover for northern friends snowbirding in RV style. There was a time when British Columbia alone contributed nearly 100,000 visitors to Arizona in a single year, not counting their luggage, which included RVs longer than a Walmart parking lot. But by 2025, that travel route feels like a rusty railway. Still there, but no longer moving. On roads around Yuma and Glendale, you can hear the wind sweeping through, see the sky clear and blue, but no longer hear Canadian neighbors knocking on doors to invite each other out for golf. RV parks that once bustled like county fairs, now so quiet the groundskeeper remembers the names of every remaining Winnebago. This isn't the first time Arizona has faced a tough tourist season, but it is the first time the absence of a single nation has left such a clear economic void. Let's start with the basics. Tourism makes up about 10% of Arizona's economy, and among all visitors, Canadians are the most loyal. They don't just visit for a few days, they live here for months, sometimes half a year, renting seasonal homes, using medical services, playing golf, dining out, and even buying temporary auto insurance. Last year, Canadians spent nearly $800 million in Arizona. A tip-your-hat number if you're the cashier at a sandwich shop in a retirement community. But this year, everything's changed. Flights from Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal to Phoenix have dropped sharply. Border crossings are missing their usual wave of maple leaf-flagged vehicles. And, most importantly, those niche services that exist solely because of Canadian visitors, winter clinics, cactus viewing tours, even shops selling Montreal-style bagels, are now on the verge of shutting down. Why aren't Canadians coming? The reasons are, as always, complicated. Politics, more tangled visa procedures, rising health insurance costs, and a growing movement in Canada to spend at home. But on an emotional level, one thing is clear: Canadians don't feel as welcome as before. With their polite and gentle nature, Canadians don't slam the table in protest. They simply change course, from Arizona to Spain, from Las Vegas to Lisbon, from Palm Desert to their own living rooms. And that quiet departure hits harder than any loud declaration. But if there's one thing that sets Arizona apart, it's resilience and desert humor. At a city council meeting in Apache Junction, one member joked, "Maybe we should rename this place Nuevo Ontario to make it more appealing." Everyone laughed, but then actually discussed increasing the media budget targeting Canadians in French. Some golf courses have reprinted their flyers with the line, "Bienvenue, nos amis du Nord," welcome, friends from the North. Resorts are offering promos like, "Stay 2 months, get 1 Quebec-style dinner free." And at a local pharmacy, a staff member even learned a few basic French phrases just to keep the elderly Canadian customers who buy vitamins monthly. Small gestures, big meaning, because when you know where your customers are from, And more importantly, why they stopped coming. That's when you can start to rebuild the bridge. Arizona hasn't collapsed, but Arizona is learning how to love Canada again, in a way that's sincere, open, and also strategic. Because everyone knows, in the desert, the chill doesn't come from snow. It comes from the absence of those who once made it warm. And if this winter stays quiet, it might be time for Arizona to send a delegation, hand-delivering maple chocolates to every apartment door in Vancouver. Because in economics, just like in friendship, one small gesture can change an entire season. Indiana, when the biggest partner goes silent. In Indiana, people aren't used to showiness. This is a state of diligence, of factories, of morning shift whistles and metal lunchboxes. If Florida lives off tourists and Arizona lives off sunshine, then Indiana lives off manufacturing. And here, manufacturing isn't just a job, it's an identity. But in 2025, something is happening. Not loudly, not making headlines, yet quietly forcing the whole state to hesitate. Canada has stopped placing orders. You can't hear the sound of a cancelled contract. You can't see a container that never left port. But in small towns like Elkhart or Terre Haute, you can clearly feel something. The coffee shop near the industrial zone opens later. The factory parking lot suddenly has more empty spaces. And in Monday morning meetings, the production manager suddenly talks less than usual. Why? Because Canada isn't calling anymore. For decades, Canada has been Indiana's #1 international trade partner. Nearly $12 billion in goods annually, from auto parts to medical equipment, from steel sheets to heavy machinery, cross the northern border. But this year, those numbers no longer hold. Orders from Ontario have dropped sharply. Partners in Quebec have paused imports. Some Canadian companies have quietly shifted to Europe, not because of quality concerns, but because they simply no longer want to buy from the U.S. Why? No official announcement. But everyone knows. Political instability, trade tensions, and an undercurrent in Canadian society saying, we should keep our money at home. And in specialized manufacturing sectors like Indiana's, where a large order from Montreal can support an entire small town, being seen but not replied to by Canada is worrisome. A machine shop owner in Muncie puts it bluntly, we're not afraid of competition, but what we fear is silence. Because it doesn't end. Indiana has long been called America's reliable engine. 1 in 5 people here works in manufacturing. But that very specialization is also its vulnerability. When you depend too much on one loyal customer, and that customer suddenly goes silent. Sadly, in the world of supply chains, nothing is quieter than being replaced. A contract not renewed. A shipment delayed due to internal reasons. An email returned after 3 weeks, thanking you for the past collaboration. And the ripple effects spread further than people think. In agricultural towns of northern Indiana, where trucks full of corn and soybeans once lined up to depart for border ports, many now turn around. Some cooperatives report up to a 20% drop in orders from Canada. Pork processing plants that once exported there are now rerouting to Mexico as a firefighting solution. But Hoosiers aren't easily defeated. At a job fair in South Bend, a mechanical engineering student asked bluntly, if Canada isn't buying, why don't we find new customers? And that question wasn't just welcomed, it's being acted on. Many small companies are pivoting to Latin America and Southeast Asia. Some Indiana startups are digitizing their supply chains to be more flexible amid shifting demand. State officials are also stepping up direct talks with Canadian provinces, bypassing federal channels, instead using long-standing business networks. And if there's one thing that sets Indiana apart, it's a kind of practical likability. No whining, no blaming, just straightforward questions and concrete actions. We might not be able to change Washington's policies, but we can change how we email our partner in Toronto, a small CEO in Lafayette said, with a dry, steady smile. Indiana doesn't need fireworks. Just keep the machines running, the workers clocking in, and the supply chain breathing, even if it's short breaths. But to make that happen, they know one thing. Canada can't just be a fond memory of good partnerships. They must make Canada come back, with new reasons, a new tone, and by proving we are still the most reliable business partner you've ever had. If not, then the sound of the hydraulic presses in Fort Wayne, once pounding like the state's heartbeat, will begin to slow. And Indiana, like a skilled craftsman forgotten, will have to make noise on its own to remind the world. We're still here, still ready to work. Just need someone to place the order. Michigan, when the border gears slip. If Indiana is the mechanical hand of America, then Michigan is the robotic arm steering the auto industry. This isn't just where cars are made, it's where economic recovery is assembled, bolt by bolt, line of code by line of code. And in that complex operating chain, Canada isn't just a neighbor. Canada is the central axle, the balancing force of the Michigan machine. But then, like a car suddenly losing traction from the rear wheels, in 2025, everything started to stall. The Detroit-Windsor port, once the artery between two economies, is now slowing down. Orders from Ontario to factories in Grand Rapids, Lansing, or Flint are no longer as steady as before. A production manager in Dearborn puts it bluntly, if it used to be the sound of machines running smoothly, now it's the sound of people asking, why haven't the parts arrived yet? Because the truth is, more than $27 billion worth of goods were once exported annually from Michigan to Canada. A number that wasn't just about money, but about jobs, value chains, and the trust this state had placed in a cross-border relationship, once thought as strong as forged steel. The problem is, when trust cracks, even steel can break. Since the pandemic, Michigan had made an impressive comeback. Detroit, the city once synonymous with the collapse of the U.S. auto industry, had gradually returned as a symbol of rebirth. EV startups were popping up like mushrooms after rain. Investment projects from Canada and abroad kept flowing in, and people began to believe, maybe, just maybe, Detroit could rise again the way Henry Ford once dreamed. But then in 2025, something small, but dangerous, began. Canada quietly started pulling back. No cuts, no statements, just contracts for auto parts being postponed. A few supply chains switching to European partners. Some Canadian companies cutting down imports from Michigan, citing preference for local suppliers. And bit by bit, the gears that once aligned perfectly began to slip. It may sound small, but when you're running an assembly line with hundreds of steps, a single missed beat can bring the entire factory to a halt. A Saginaw engineer offers a wry smile. We didn't lose Canadian clients because they were angry, but because they're tired. Tired of ever-changing tax policies. Tired of waiting for entry visas just to attend trade expos in Chicago. Tired of turning on the TV and seeing yet another political spat between the two countries. From the Canadian side, this might just be a move to support local. But for Michigan, a state with over 180,000 jobs directly tied to Canadian trade, this is a downpour on a bridge already patched too many times. And Michigan isn't sitting still. In Port Huron, a regional conference on reconnecting supply chains with Canadian provinces was held, where Americans invited Canadian partners to a BBQ and product standards talk. A few factories in Ann Arbor have moved to a dual certification model to meet both countries' regulations. At border crossings, U.S. customs agents are learning a few phrases in French, not just to be polite, but to soften the business relationship. Even a group of entrepreneurs in Traverse City launched a media campaign. Built Together, Fabrique Ensemble, featuring a half-American, half-Canadian car cruising on a shared runway. A message that says, "We built something great together. Let's not let politics ruin the engine." That's the Michigan way. When something goes wrong, they don't smash the car. They lift the hood, inspect, and get to work fixing it. Because they know, if the engine stays off too long, what's lost isn't just money, but the feeling that progress is still possible. And as an old garage owner once said, with the gravelly laugh of someone soaked in motor oil, "Those Canadians? They're regulars. Their car's not broken. They're just deciding whether to come back. Our job? Make sure the open sign out front is lit up like new." Illinois. When the neighbor stops knocking. Illinois has long lived to the rhythm of commerce, from the rolling wheels on I-55 to the train whistles echoing at the port of Chicago. This isn't just a state of endless cornfields or sky-high Chicago skyscrapers, but the biggest commercial hub of the American Midwest. And if Indiana or Michigan depends on production chains, then Illinois is a symphony of transportation, agriculture, industry, and especially exports. In that symphony, Canada is the lead section, the one that keeps the tempo. And then in 2025, that section stopped. Not because of a break, but because Canada, like a neighbor who used to drop by every day, suddenly stopped knocking. No warning, no explanation, just didn't come anymore. A farmer in Quincy, who used to export soybeans to Ontario, shrugged and said, "We're not mad, just surprised. They used to come every fall. But not this year. It's like they slipped off the map." In reality, they didn't slip. They shifted direction. The latest data from the state's Trade Department shows exports from Illinois to Canada dropped nearly 11% in the first quarter. That's not just a dry number. It's a slow but decisive pullback. From electronic components to agricultural equipment, from animal feed to machinery tools, everything suddenly has fewer orders. In Peoria, once seen as a symbol of American industry, a heavy equipment factory reduced its shifts from 3 to 2. In Rockford, several small assembly units are waiting for email responses from Canadian partners. But their inboxes are full of printer deals. This awkward situation is spreading. A logistics company in Bloomington said they used to send 4 containers a week to Toronto. Now it's just 1. And the driver gets Fridays off for flexibility. Meanwhile, a food processing company in Decatur has started printing labels in Spanish because Canadian orders have been rerouted to the Colombian market. No one wants to call this a crisis. Illinoisans dislike dramatic words. They call it a period of adjustment and quietly recalculate the budget. But deep down, everyone knows, when Canada pulls back, Illinois loses more than just a buyer. They lose an old acquaintance, the kind you can call without reintroducing yourself. So the efforts to salvage the relationship, though quiet, are underway. In Chicago, the state's Department of Foreign Trade organized a Reconnect North conference to rebuild trust with Canadian businesses. Farmers around Springfield switched to virtual fairs, live-streamed in Canadian accented English, explaining clean and transparent farming processes as if to say, "We haven't changed. We're still the reliable partner." And there are even adorably naive efforts. A transport company in Joliet once included maple syrup with Canadian shipments as a message. America still remembers the taste of friendship. It sounds funny, but honestly, it's very Illinois. People here don't chase media stunts. They believe in quality, in long-term commitment. But they also know that in today's economic world, where trust is shaken by tweets and temporary tariffs, being reliable alone isn't enough. Illinois now has to return to the core lesson. Trade is a relationship between people. And that northern neighbor, while polite, also has feelings. And a breaking point. So the solution isn't just cutting prices, it's raising goodwill. It's saying again, we're sorry for whatever made you hesitate. It's inviting them back, not just as customers, but as old friends who can become close again. And Illinois, with its resilient nature, won't let go of that chance. Because they know, in a world that's changing rapidly, the most valuable thing is someone familiar who knocks on your door every morning. And if lucky, that door might once again echo with a knock from the north. Gentle, polite, but enough to restart an entire symphony of trade. Minnesota. When steadiness becomes an uneasy silence. If you ask a Minnesotan what makes them most proud of their home, they might smile and say, "We're not too loud, but we're always steady." Here, the snow falls thick, the lakes stretch endlessly, and the way of life is as if everything can be solved with a hot cup of coffee and a polite nod. And truly, Minnesota is a state that never likes to overdo things. No chasing trends, no banging drums. That quiet steadiness has made it a reliable economic anchor, a valued partner on America's trade map. But then, in 2025, that stability began to show cracks. Not because of weakened internal strength, but because a once warm relationship to the north was growing cold. Canada, an equally quiet neighbor, suddenly pulled back from orders, delayed contract payments, and sometimes stopped replying to emails. And for Minnesota, where 40% of international trade is tied to Canada, that felt like singing a duet only to have the partner turn off their mic. In St. Cloud, a factory specializing in high-end medical devices that used to receive regular orders from Ontario hospitals had to cut 1/3 of its capacity. In Rochester, home of the Mayo Clinic, biomedical tech firms once commissioned by Canada for trial research are now scrambling to redirect funding. And in Duluth, the once bustling shipping port for barley and iron ore, bound for Manitoba, is now so quiet you can hear a seagull snore. A train conductor from Bemidji joked bitterly, "We used to have 3 runs a week to Canada. Now it's 1. And every week we're nervous whether there's enough cargo to make the trip." What surprises Minnesota the most is they didn't do anything wrong. No disputes, no harsh words exchanged, not a single controversial tweet from the state government. But still, Canada stepped back. The truth is, in what's being called a soft economic boycott, Minnesota isn't hated. They're just no longer a priority. When Canada starts choosing new partners, Europe, Mexico, or domestic supply chains, even a kind and resilient state like Minnesota gets pushed off the negotiation table without a chance to explain. And so, the places that used to depend on northern orders are beginning to stall. In Mankato, an industrial pig farm had to shift to the South Korean market, incurring higher transport costs, regulatory hurdles, and inspection fees, just to make up for the Canadian drop-off. A soybean farmer in Fergus Falls, who used to export to Saskatchewan, now just sighs. They're not buying anymore. Didn't say why. Didn't say if they'll come back. So what is Minnesota doing? The beautiful thing is, they're not shouting. No one here is calling for trade sanctions or issuing strong reactions. They're doing things the most Minnesotan way possible. Making calls, sending handwritten letters, and offering coffee. Many businesses have begun organizing friendly visits to trade expos in Ottawa and Winnipeg. A group of young entrepreneurs in Minneapolis even created a B2B platform called Border Buddies, where small and medium businesses from both countries can restart direct relationships, bypassing political red tape. And while most of America still argues over tariffs and protectionism, Minnesota quietly does the most sensible thing. reminding Canadians that stability is worth something. They held an event in International Falls called Together Through Winter, a cross-border winter cultural fair where people from both sides ice skated, ate apple pie, and signed a few small contracts while sipping hot cider. You might think that's small, but in Minnesota, small things are how the world is kept from breaking apart. And if you ever find yourself in a town along the border, don't be surprised to see a sign that reads, "Still friends, still trading. Call us, eh?" A witty yet sincere message to our northern neighbor that friendship doesn't need a contract. Just don't forget about each other. Minnesota isn't flashy, but it's steadfast. And if anyone can bring Canada back through kindness, it's the place with 10,000 lakes and a deep belief that everything will be okay. If you offer the right person the right cup of coffee at the right time. When the border is no longer a line, but a distance. In the northwestern United States, there are small towns that Google Maps sometimes forgets to name. But for Canadians living in British Columbia, especially in Vancouver and the Fraser Valley, places like Blaine, Bellingham, or Lyndon are anything but unfamiliar. With just a short drive, they could cross the border, shop at American supermarkets, fill up on cheaper gas, enjoy an American-style dinner, or simply take a walk in the land just beyond the fence. A place not so different, but always with something a little fresher. These trips didn't need planning, no reason required. They were a habit, a part of the rhythm of border life. But in 2025, those habits are quietly fading, just as quietly as they once formed. In Blaine, the gas station that used to be packed every weekend now closes 3 hours earlier. A diner known for its Texas-style cheeseburgers had to switch to a low-carb menu to please domestic customers, because their regular Canadian crowd no longer shows up as often. And strangely, no one said goodbye. No press releases. No official, "We're done here." Just a slow disappearance of British Columbia license plates in Walmart parking lots, now as rare as snow in August. This silence doesn't come from anger. It comes from fatigue, from being held longer at border checks, from feeling less welcome, and from national-level political debates that ordinary people had no part in, but still have to feel the weight of. Of the 6 U.S. states heavily impacted by the Canadian retreat, Washington may not export as much as Illinois or have the industrial network of Indiana. But this state has something even more valuable, a natural closeness between people on both sides. That closeness was woven through weekend road trips, bulk shopping runs at American Costco stores, and phone calls from relatives in Seattle asking if cousin in Surrey's free for BBQ on Saturday. It's a personal network, more binding than any trade deal, and when those little things suddenly disappear, the local economy starts to feel the chill. A mall in Bellingham reported a 36% drop in revenue for Q1 2025 compared to the same period last year. The outlet stores in Burlington, once a cross-border shopping paradise, are now so empty the security guard recognizes every passerby. Service businesses across Whatcom County, from restaurants to gas stations to convenience stores, are plummeting. Not because Americans changed, but because Canadians quietly said goodbye. Yet if any place in America understands the meaning of a strong cross-border relationship, it's Washington State. People here aren't waiting for the government to act. They're finding their own ways to hold on to a thread that's growing thinner. A small store in Lyndon put up a sign that reads, "Back soon, eh?" A humorous but heartfelt message. A local fair in Blaine renamed itself Border Bonanza and sent invitations in both English and French to nearby communities around Vancouver. In Seattle, universities are reactivating student exchange programs with BC schools with a simple but effective slogan, "Let's learn again, together." And of course, the coffee shops haven't forgotten their classic offer. Free drip coffee for Canadian ID holders. One cup of coffee can't hold up an economy, but it can hold on to a feeling of closeness. Because in this part of the world, people understand that trade isn't just about Excel sheets. It's about emotion. It's the comfort of driving 30 minutes and feeling like you're visiting family. It's the joy of spotting a license plate with BCI and thinking, aha, they're still coming. And if there's any hope of reigniting a trade connection that's cooling off, it won't come from complicated tax agreements. It'll come from simple gestures, a sincere invitation, a door that's always open, and a hot cup of coffee waiting at the counter. Washington understands that, and maybe with patience, kindness, and just the right touch of Pacific Northwest humor, they'll be the first to bring Canadians back. Not for cheap prices, but because they still feel welcome. Because here, the border isn't a fence, it's an invitation.